My name is Jeremiah Poling. I'm the Deputy General Manager at the Angelina Nature Authority. This is our annual steering committee meeting for the Clean Rivers program. The agenda is up on the screen. We're going to do things a little bit out of order because of the way we're grouping the presentations. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction to the River Authority, and then I'm going to have our Water Quality Program Manager come and give you a little bit of an introduction to the Clean Rivers program, and then I'm going to step back in and talk about our basic summary report and special project that we have. And then I'm going to have Anna from the Texas Water Resource Institute come up and talk about the projects that we're partnering with them on. And then we're going to have the TCEQ TMDL team come up and talk about a project that they're working on in the area. And then we're going to have our Public Relations Director come up and talk about education and outreach efforts that we've been going on for the past year. So the Nature River Basin covers all or part of 17 counties. The Angelina Nature River Authority has jurisdiction over all but 3 of those counties that belong to the Lower Neches Valley Authority. That's Jefferson, Hardin, and Tyler counties down in the lower portion of the basin. For CRP purposes, we split the basin about at the Sam Rayburn Dam. Everything south of there, the Lower Neches Valley Authority monitors, and everything north of there we monitor in partnership with TCEQ regional offices and organizations like the Texas Water Resource Institute. The River Authority thinks of itself in 3 parts. We have our General Administration Division that coordinates with governments and entities. We do water resource planning development. We have water systems, drinking water systems around the East Texas area that need help, and we partner with TCEQ in those water systems to try and bring them back up to standards. We've taken over several failed water systems and operate those now. And then we also have an economic development arm that does conduit bond issuances, which is just a way for certain organizations to borrow our tax exempt status to do economic bond issuances. Our Utilities Division operates a wastewater treatment plant here outside of Lufkin that's regional. It collects from Central ISD, the State Supported Living Center on 69, as well as a couple of subdivisions. And it runs up to Highway 59 and collects from a couple of subdivisions on the other side of 59. So it's a regionalized wastewater treatment plant that's mostly on the north side of Lufkin. We have 5 drinking water utilities that we operate. 3 of those were failed ones that we took over and are in the process of bringing back up to standards. And then we have a composting facility in Jacksonville that takes wastewater sludge from municipal wastewater treatment plants and turns it into beneficial use. We make compost out of it, sell as much as we can make. If we were able to double the size of the facility, we would still not be able to keep up with the demand for it. It's a pretty popular product. And then we have our environmental division. So we have recently changed the way that we're talking about this internally. We used to just call it our CRP program, and that CRP program kind of underneath that had all of the Clean Water Act and TMDL and all the stuff that was kind of associated with CRP, but wasn't directly part of it. We have renamed that internally the Water Quality Monitoring Program. So now it's CRP, TMDL, whatever we're doing in that vein. And Meredith Coffey is our Water Quality Program Manager. She'll be up here talking to you in just a minute. And then we also have an environmental laboratory that does all the testing for our Clean Rivers program and Clean Water Act projects, as well as testing for municipalities in the area, drinking water, wastewater, surface water, et cetera. And then we are the TCEQ designated representative for on-site sewage facilities program permitting in Angelina County, San Augustine County, and a 2,000-foot buffer around Lake Sam Rayburn. So we touch 4 other counties as part of that. So with that, I'm gonna let Meredith come up here and tell you a little bit about CRP, and then I'll step back in.
Hi all, I'm Meredith Coffey, and I just joined ANRA late January. And like you said, I'm over the water quality programs of the CRP and the CWA. And this Clean Rivers project, it started in 1991, and ANRA was a part of it during then. And then our purpose is to monitor the waters and waters of the state and maintain and improve water quality. The emphasis that ANRA and I have are to actually get the collection of the water quality and then with other partners and agencies to do the evaluation of the watersheds. And we are funded by the state, and then it's a collaboration of TCEQ and our other partners and agencies. So. And then here's our budget. So annually there's a $10 million budget to CRP, and the Angelina and Neches River Authority is different because we're split between us and the Lower Neches Valley River Authority, and so we get about 392,000 split in between. And the breakdown of our budget is mostly personnel and salary, and then the majority of that is from our laboratory cost. And as of the fiscal 2026, the Neches Basin water quality monitoring schedule we have, the Angelina and Neches River Authority, we have 46 monitoring sites. TCEQ Region 5 Tyler has 20. TCEQ Region 10 Beaumont has 22. And then the Lower Neches Valley River Authority has 23. And then Tarrant County has 1 from Lake Palestine. And then the Texas Water Resources Institute has 3 monitoring sites. And then we additionally have 2 other 24-hour dissolved oxygen sites, one at Cedar Creek here in Lufkin on the loop, and then one on the riverine portion of the San Rayburn Reservoir.
Meredith has been drinking from the fire hose since she started working, and she is picking it up very quickly. We're very, very pleased to have her. So of these sites that we're monitoring, 37 of them are quarterly CRP sites. The remainder, when you're looking at that 46 number, pointer doesn't work on television screens. I'm used to working with a projector. The 46 includes those 37 plus the ones that we're partnering with TWRI to do the monitoring for. So the 3 that TWRI is monitoring are the ones that are monitoring themselves, and the remainder of the difference between the 37 and 46 is ones that we're partnering with TWRI on. So as a more comprehensive listing, and also a mention of a change that we're doing for next fiscal year, of those 37 routine sites, we're dropping one of them, Cedar Ellis Avenue. It is in the same AU as Cedar at the Loop, and we have, when we picked up monitoring at that site, we were trying to see if there was a significant water quality difference between those two, even though it was in the same AU, and we found that there wasn't really too much of a difference, and the one at Ellis is frequently stagnant. So we haven't found it in a dry state, but it's often no flow, which is less than optimal for water quality monitoring. So we're taking that one off the list. And then the 24 hours that we're doing on Cedar at the Loop, we're going to continue doing routine monitoring there, but we're not going to do 24-hour anymore because we have enough data for the assessment. The IH5 sampling project, which is one of them that we're partnering with TWRI on, that one picked back up in March of 26, and it's funded to sample for 22 months. That one's sampling 8 sites. 2 of them are combo sites with CRP. We coordinate the monitoring, and in CRP quarterly months, the project only samples 6 sites, and the other 2 are picked up by CRP. And in the months when CRP is not monitoring the project, picks up all 8. That's kind of a theme for our projects. Because we sample quarterly for CRP, we tend to try to do monthly sampling as our least frequent sampling for these Clean Water Act projects. And so we oftentimes are coordinating with CRP to pick up that, to be able to have a monthly data set without having to have the project pay for the entire thing, because CRP is already collecting some of them. So same thing for Lena. There are 3 sites that are CRP sites. There's only 1 site there that's strictly for the project, that's on Bonita at Martin Luther King in Nacogdoches. So that one began sampling. And when I say restarted, I'm saying that because these are continuation projects. We had a project that was sampling or that was doing a WDP or something, and we've not extended the project. We've gotten a follow-up project that's doing the same work. So that one, the most recent project, began sampling in July of 2025, and it's funded for 18 months of sampling monthly. The Sandy Creek project is one that Anna's heading up, and that's the one that the TWRI is doing sampling themselves for. It's in Jasper. That was leading up towards a WPP most likely. Sampling there beginning in June of 25, and it's funded for 24 months. We're doing a watershed. We're not calling it a characterization yet. It's kind of a preliminary to a watershed characterization. We're just collecting some additional data. By Carrizo, we started sampling in about 2014. And it ended up on the impaired list, of course. As soon as we start looking at it, they always end up on the impaired list. And so we are, for bacteria, we are collecting samples from that site monthly, in addition to the CRP quarterly, and then we're also collecting it to tributary sites to see how widespread the issue is within the basin. It's a rural watershed, and the expectation is that it's going to be uniform throughout the watershed, but we're collecting the data to verify. Atoyac Bayou WPP implementation is a project we partner with TWRI and SFA on. They have students go out and do the sampling. That one's in QAPP development. It's funded for 33 months of sampling, and it's out for signatures on the QAPP right now. So we should hopefully be sampling on that one within the next 2 or 3 months. And then the East Texas Metal Sampling Project is in QAPP development. I want to talk about that one a little bit more here. This is a map of all the monitoring sites, with the exception of the 2 that I mentioned on Carrizo, which are missing for some reason, and I didn't catch it until just now. As you can see from the legend, the ones that are labeled Clean Water Act stations are the ones that AMRA is monitoring, but as part of the special project. So the blue ones are our CRP sites, TCQ Region 5 in Tyler, and Region 10 in Beaumont are the brown ones. LMDA monitors the green ones. Tarrant Regional has that one site on Lake Palestine because they're getting ready to hook up the integrated pipeline and start pulling water from Palestine for the Metroplex. So they began sampling about 3 years ago near where the intake structure is going to be. So that's their goal with that sampling, is drinking water sampling. And then you can also see on this map, as I mentioned, a portion of the basin is outside of AMRA's jurisdiction, and that's those green counties down there that are within the Lower Natchez Valley Authority's jurisdiction. These are the parameters that we monitor for. I don't think there's anything, if you're doing any kind of water quality monitoring, you're already familiar with the bulk of these. The major change from the past on this is that we're monitoring nitrate and nitrite individually where we can. That's the preference. The gotcha with that is that it's only got a 48-hour hold time. So if the lab has any issues running it at all, we have to switch out to nitrate plus nitrite, which has a 28-day hold time. So we write our QAPPs with that and fall back. What else? There's the segment watersheds, just for edification. I don't really have anything to say about that. If you're familiar with them, then you know. That line, again, the line there kind of below Sam Rayburn is where the split happens for our monitoring versus LMDA's monitoring. We do a little bit south of the reservoir, and they do a little bit north of it, but generally that's where the line is. Our 2026 Upper Natchez Basin summary report, we just finished it. Katrina just approved it this morning. It's posted on our website as of this morning. I've printed out a couple of just the executive summary portion of it, which is about 20 pages long. The entire document is nearly 400 pages long. We got a little bit carried away. This table lists the impairments in the basin by segment, and it is paired up with this map right here. So as you're looking at the different segments there, you got 604 and then all of the unclassified that flow into 604 and then 605, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see, the bulk of the impairments are bacteria throughout the basin, throughout the state, I believe. We've got some nutrient concerns, but the impairments are mostly bacteria. There's a few dissolved oxygen. We've been seeing pH levels rise recently on some of the lakes in the area. That's the one on Rayburn, for instance, for the pH impairment is a fairly new impairment. The toxics in edible fish tissue has been around for quite some time. And we expect it to continue to be. The Department of State Health Services does the sampling for that, and they're not even motivated to come back out and sample again for it because they don't believe that it's going away. This is a page from the summary report. Oh, the summary, by the way, the summary report is like the massive report that we do every 6th year. And we do an annual report, but it's usually much smaller than this one. So this is the big one that happens every 6th year. We had, how many 233 trends identified. So in the document, we list out what we're considering a statistically significant trend. We ran this through some code in R to generate a bunch of graphs to generate these tables, and of those 233. So this is a 25-year data set. We pulled data from SWCMIS for the Nature River Basin from the year 2000 to current, so most of 2025. And this is what we found. I'm not going to read all of it to you. This is a list of all the impairments that are in the 2024 303D list. It's the same that are in that summary table that I showed you a moment ago, so I'm again not going to list them off. This is listed in the report as well. And then these were reclassifications and delistings from the 2022 integrated report to the 2024. So most of these were due to TMDLs being completed. Cedar Creek went from category 5A to category 4A. Category 5A is on the 303 impaired list. 4A means that a TMDL is in place for it. Doesn't mean the water quality issue's gone away. It just means there's a plan in place to deal with it. So the only one that the impairment actually went away on was Piney Creek. And I think that was just probably due to either a reclassification for the standard or just due to wet-dry cycles. So it's possible that it ends up back on the list if it was a wet-dry thing. We have seen that happen. We started working in 2009 on the watershed protection plan for Atoyac Bayou, and we worked so hard on it for about 5 years. And in one cycle of the integrated report, the Atoyac Bayou came off the impaired list. And we cheered, and everybody, the soil board put out a report crowing about it, and the next cycle it was back on. So I feel like we're holding it steady. We're keeping it from getting worse at the very least. A couple of links to the Clean Rivers Program website that TCEQ hosts, Surface Water Quality Monitoring Procedures Manual. I'm not even sure why that's in there, but it's a helpful document if you want it. I'm sure all of you have seen it already. A list of our monitoring activities, the coordinated monitoring schedule, education outreach materials, and then a link to the page where that report that we've been talking about is located. And there's Meredith's contact info. I don't think that phone number is right. So this is a page that I pulled out of the summary report. So if you want a copy of it, it's in there. The metal sampling project. This is so we're starting the special project section of the meeting now. This is the metal sampling project. This is a project that TCEQ approached us to try and do some follow-up sampling on, because in the 2006 integrated report period, that 7 years of data that they were pulling from that, they found that there were some water bodies that had some unusual metals data, and they weren't able to find a good reason for the metals to have been as high as they were in those areas. And eventually, after a bunch of back and forth with EPA, they decided that there might be an issue with the filters that they were using to collect the samples. And so we're going to go back out and we're going to recollect data at those sites using the currently accepted filter media and see if the numbers that were collected in that previous period were reasonable numbers, with the expectation that the hope that they were not, and it was just an issue with the filters. That one's in QAPP development. We're hoping to begin sampling on that one before the end of this year. And this one is interesting because normally we don't work outside of our CRP area, but on this one we're kind of partnering with the Lower Neches Valley Authority to do the work down in the Beaumont area. and we're going to partner with the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority. Is going to do the sampling in the New Braunfels area. So we're going to supply them with the bottles and do the QAPP development and everything, but they're going to collect the samples and ship them off to the Sabine River Authority lab, because our lab doesn't do metals sampling. But we were able to find a CRP lab that did do it. So Sabine is going to do the testing, and we're going to do the collection for everything except for the one in New Braunfels, and GBRA is going to do the collection for that one. And hopefully we'll get some good data out of it. And that's all I got on that one. Any questions? If not, then I'm going to have Anna come up and tell you about all of the fun stuff that we're doing together.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hannah Eismont. I'm a program specialist with the Texas Water Resources Institute, and I was given everybody's slides to come present to y'all today. So bear with me if some of the presentation's if I read from some of the slides, because only like 3 of the slides are mine. I'm not smart at this.
Isn't that a good one? I think it did this the last time, then we had to use this. It's completely frozen. Oh, it's completely frozen.
Cool. All right. This is a great presentation.
You got it.
It's like I can just click through on the. Okay. Middle Nature's Tributaries TMDL updates. The PM on our end for this project is Matt Stelbauer. So if you have questions about that, he's a good person to reach out to. So a little bit of background. TCEQ manages water quality by setting standards and identifying compared water bodies by doing monitoring and assessments. They like to engage stakeholders to help get stakeholders involved to develop and implement plans to improve water quality using both regulatory and non-regulatory tools. Regulatory will regulate discharges from point sources, and non-regulatory, we've got to manage runoff from non-point sources. So we've got a handful of Middle Nature's tributaries around the Lufkin area below Lake Palestine. All of these tributaries have higher concentrations of E. coli in them, which, as you know, a higher concentration of E. coli leads to potentially an increased health risk for swimming and wading in the creeks. So total maximum daily load reports and implementation plans were developed for these creeks to begin addressing some of the bacteria impairment. This is another view of some of the watersheds that have the TMDLs on them. So we've got Jack Creek, Cedar Creek, Hurricane Creek, and Biloxi Creek that are all have TMDLs on them. And then this little portion of Cedar Creek, which is very recently, was listed on the 2026 draft IR. So the TMDL was amended to add this upper portion of it. Most of it is within the city boundaries of Lufkin. So these are the current conditions in these creeks. We've got alphabetical Biloxi, Cedar, Hurricane, Jack, and then Sandy Creek and Wolf Creek also have TMDLs in place but are monitored elsewhere. So unfortunately, the concentrations are higher than their criteria, but that is what TMDLs and WPPs are for. So there is still hope. The TMDLs and I-plans were developed with local stakeholders kind of between 2019 and 2022 for almost all of these creeks. So those are in place now, and I-plans are in place and being implemented to help address these water quality issues. So the conclusion was that impairments in all the watersheds were largely driven by non-point source runoff, and it does require a pretty significant drop in bacteria indicating, but where there's a plan in place. So kind of the general things you would expect to see. So promoting feral hog management, continuing to do water quality monitoring and improve that water quality, promote volunteers so that the local stakeholders are involved and have a more intentional stake in what's going on, promote sustainable forest practices, implement water quality conservation practices, reduce OSSF issues, and a lot of education and awareness. People can't help fix it if they don't know what's going on, and OSSF management. So far, there have been a feral hog program delivered. ANRA has partnered with Texas Stream Team to help do monitoring and help do some citizen science and get local stakeholders involved. The Texas Forest Service reports that 92% of the sites that they monitor are implementing good forestry PMPs, which is great news. We're still working on developing conservation plans. The educational mailers for grazing practices have been sent out, and kind of more stuff is coming with these TMDLs. And you got some resources here for this project. All right, Atoyac Bayou, and then the PM of RN for this is Alexander Neal. And then please email if you have questions about these projects. So we've got two within this watershed. One is the Laniana Bayou WPP implementation. So this WPP is in place, I believe, and then this implementation project runs from the end of December 2024, at least through November of this year, hopefully a little bit longer to get a little bit more implementation going. So the Laniana Bayou is within the city of Nacogdoches in Nacogdoches County. It has a bacteria impairment kind of throughout its segments and also some nutrient concerns. So education and outreach are kind of the big push for this WPP and impairment. So the implementation is intended to support existing CRP monitoring that is largely being done by ANRA, which includes ammonia, nitrate, and nitrate nitrogen, total phosphorus, total suspended solids, chloride, sulfite, and E. coli at these 4 sites along Laniana Bayou and then along Bonita Creek. Atoyac Bayou WPP implementation, which is a 319 project. This project just is less than a year old and will run through September of 2028. So this one is upstream of San Rayburn Reservoir in San Augustine, Nacogdoches, Shelby, and Rusk counties. There is an impairment, bacteria impairment on a bunch of the segments for Atoyac Bayou. And again, lots of education and outreach for this one being planned with Piney Woods Resource Conservation and Development. And this one also, I believe, is one that has student sampling on it for Atoyac Bayou, yeah. So students at the university nearby also help with the monitoring at these sites on Atoyac Bayou and West Creek. So this one, the QAPP has been signed and is awaiting execution. So monitoring should begin soon in the next month or so. So monitoring to support then the implementation that's happening in education. And some more resources, we've got websites for these projects. All right, and Bayou Carrizo, supplemental water quality monitoring and data analysis. It's not quite a characterization, but there is some kind of preliminary data analysis that will go into it. And then on our end, Shaylin Postma is the PM for this project. So the Bayou Carrizo watershed does have high concentrations of E. coli, particularly at that TCQ station 21432. Which again, as you all know, elevated levels, then you're going to have an elevated risk for swimming and wading in the creeks. Even though I was aware of the water quality issue, needed more data to fully understand what's going on. So that was the idea of this project. So you can see the current conditions here. The concentrations are higher than criteria, maybe slowly decreasing, but that's some of what the extended monitoring is for, to get just a really more thorough picture of what's going on in Bayou Carrizo. So monthly sampling has been occurring at 3 different stations and will be conducted for 18 months total of monitoring. So collecting flow, bacteria, and conventional and field parameters, kind of everything you expect to see. data collected under the project will be summarized along with all the historical data that exists for this project into a final report with some, not quite characterization, but kind of preliminary characterization type analysis to figure out what's going on in here. All right, Sandy Creek. This one's mine. So, Sandy Creek has been impaired for bacteria since 2000. It runs through the city of Jasper. So a TMDL was put in place in 2022. Lots of stakeholder interest in things that fall more under the WPP type of work rather than the TMDL type of work, but there wasn't enough data to support a WPP development at that point. So the project was written and TWRI is monitoring those 3 sites. So we've got one at the bottom of near BA Steinhagen, one close to town, and then 16129 is actually in the middle of Jasper. We park at a park and we sample there, which is really fun actually because a lot of the time we have people come up and ask us questions about what we're doing. I've given my email to people and stuff. So it's a super neat way, I think, to continue being visible in the town and kind of have people know that we're aware of the issue and we want to make it better. So sampling began in June of 2025 and we'll sample for 24 months. We're collecting flow, routine parameters, and some nutrients as well at those 3 stations. A characterization report will be developed as a result of this project, kind of taking in some historical stuff and then all the data that we're collecting over those 2 years. We did also submit a proposal for a WPP development project. So we'll see if that's an option to do in this watershed. And then kind of, this is a little bit more generic TWRI contact information, but if y'all have questions or want to talk with us about any of these projects, we'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Anna. TWRI and all of the project partners that we have there are amazing, and we are thrilled to work with them. All right, next we're going to have an update from the TMDL team about TCEQ.
Appreciate it. All right, how to work this thing. All right, good afternoon. My name is Sophia Staska, and I'm a TCEQ TMDL project manager. I'm here today to provide some TMDL updates going on in the Lufkin area. We have 2 TMDL projects, one for Hurricane Creek and one for Biloxi Creek. But first, I kind of want to provide y'all with an overview of how we got here. So, TMDLs are required to be developed by Section 303D of the Federal Clean Water Act for all waters identified on the Section 303D list of impaired waters. The Clean Water Act almost exclusively deals with surface water, so the state of Texas is required to develop these TMDLs for each pollutant that contributes to the impairment of a listed surface water body. All this information on impaired water bodies can be found in the Index of Water Quality Impairments in the 303D list portion of TCEQ's integrated report. Again, this document's updated every 2 years, so there will be a new version just later this year. And then, so why a total maximum daily load, or TMDL? A surface water body is considered to be impaired if it does not meet applicable water quality standards for one or more of its designated uses. So these could be recreation, fish consumption, domestic water supply, and aquatic life uses. And again, most TMDLs in Texas address bacteria impairments, which can hinder that water body from maintaining its designated recreational use. And so what overall is a TMDL? A TMDL determines the maximum amount of a specific pollutant that a water body can receive and still maintain its designated use. So when developing a TMDL, we ask ourselves the following questions to kind of help guide the process, which are: how much of a pollutant is too much? How bad is the problem? And where is it coming from? And as we all know, indicator bacteria is used for assessment. In fresh waters, we use E. coli, and tidal water bodies, we use Enterococcus. But overall, a TMDL is a target for meeting water quality standards.
On this slide, we have our TMDL equation, but let's kind of break down what these terms are and kind of what they represent. So first, I kind of like to point out that there are two waste load allocations for, there's two separate waste load allocations. There's one for wastewater treatment facilities, and then there's one for all types of permitted stormwater dischargers. So kind of think permits when we're discussing WLAs. And then we have the load allocation, or LA, which is the sum of all loadings from all unregulated sources. So this captures bacteria that may enter the water body via runoff. And then we also have our future growth, or FG, which accounts for increases in population within the TMDL watershed that could contribute additional loadings to the water body in future years. And then lastly, we have our margin of safety, which is to account for uncertainty in TMDL analysis, but also TCEQ uses an explicit MOS of 5%. So we just take the TMDL and multiply it by 5%, and that is our margin of safety. But again, TMDLs are all expressed as a daily pollutant load. And then a TMDL addendum is exactly what it sounds like, which is an addition to the original TMDL using similar methodologies and processes utilized to develop the original TMDL document. So the addendum can be added to the original TMDL watershed if it meets two conditions, which are the candidate AU must have the same impairment type as the original TMDL. So this could be bacteria, dissolved oxygen, TDS, you name it, the list goes on. And then two, the candidate AU must also already be located within the TMDL watershed boundary. And also it's worth noting that TMDL projects that are added through the addendum process do have expedited timelines. So they are completed within 1 to 2 years rather than the 4 to 6 that's the typical timeline when developing a TMDL from scratch. And then we also have an informal review and approval process between TCEQ and EPA. So instead of going in front of the TCEQ commissioners, the addendum is submitted through the routine quarterly update to the state's Water Quality Management Plan, or WQMP. And then after EPA approves that quarterly update, the addendum is then officially a part of the TMDL. So Anna kind of touched on this a little bit, but we do have some previously completed TMDLs in the tributaries of Neches River below Lake Palestine. And we first identified some of these bacteria impairments in Cedar Creek, Hurricane Creek, and Jack Creek in the 2000 Texas Integrated Report or IR, and then in each later edition after that. And then for Biloxi, it was first identified in the 2004 IR. So moving left to right, we have Jack Creek, Cedar Creek, Hurricane Creek, and then Biloxi Creek. But overall, these TMDLs were adopted by TCEQ in October of 2022, and then the TMDLs were approved by EPA in June of 2023, and then the IRAM was approved later in August of 2023. So, of course, TCEQ identified additional bacteria impairments, and we found this in the upper AU of Cedar Creek in the 2022 IR. And in response, an addendum was submitted to EPA through the January 2024 WQMP update. And that addendum added one additional TMDL for indicator bacteria and one AU in Cedar Creek. And the downstream AU was addressed in the original TMDL. There's actually 3 AUs on that stream, so it's actually that middle AU in the original TMDL. But both the addendum and the original TMDLs were developed in coordination with the Texas Water Resources Institute. And now that I've provided you all with some context for historical TMDLs within the Lufkin area, on this slide I'll discuss the project background for our 2 in-house projects that I had mentioned earlier. So additional bacteria impairments were found on Hurricane Creek and Biloxi Creek and were identified in the 2024 IR. Summaries of these IR findings are in Table 1 and Table 2. And here we can see that that data indicates like an overall non-support of the primary contact recreation use for those AUs, since the geomean concentration for E. coli exceeds the freshwater criterion, which is 126 colony forming units per 100 milliliters. And here on this right-hand side, we do have our map. So Hurricane Creek is itty bitty up there in yellow, and then we have the larger Biloxi Creek, which is that downstream AU in orange. And again, this is our first in-house project that we're working on for TMDLs for Hurricane Creek and Biloxi Creek. Hurricane Creek actually meets those conditions to be an addendum to be included through the WQMP update process. So it is within the original TMDL watershed boundary, and it is also for the same impairment as the original TMDL, which is bacteria. And then Biloxi does not meet these conditions, so it'll actually be a separate TMDL project. So for the remainder of this presentation, I will mostly focus on Hurricane Creek, but Biloxi Creek will be presented at a later date. And then here's a quick snapshot of our project timeline. So again, we identified that additional bacteria impairment on Hurricane Creek. And then from the inception of TMDL development, the project team has tried to ensure that the stakeholders were informed and involved as communication and comments from the stakeholders like you all in the watershed strengthen TMDL projects as well as their implementation. So far we've developed the Technical Support Document, or TSD, which documents the specific methodologies behind how we determine the addendum TMDL pollutant load allocations. That draft was actually published on the project page just earlier this month, and now the TSD and its corresponding addendum document are going through the internal TCEQ review and approval process, but we anticipate submitting that addendum with the 2026 October WQMP update. So here we'll kind of shift gears and start talking about key features within the Hurricane Creek watershed as they relate to bacteria TMDL development. So Hurricane Creek is a very small watershed. It drains just about 5 square miles and is an unclassified perennial freshwater stream. This watershed does drain into its downstream AU, which was a part of the original TMDL. And this land cover data here is from the 2019 National Land Cover Database. And the predominant land cover that we identified was developed, which sits at about 83% of the watershed. And then it's followed by mixed and evergreen forest, with both of those around 7%. And then next we have our population and population projections. So the water population estimates were developed using the U.S. Census Bureau 2020 census block data, and the estimated population of the TMDL watershed was 8,132 in 2020. And then that watershed population is projected to increase to 10,350 by 2070. So this represents about a 27.3% increase from 2020 to 2070. And then while developing a TMDL, it's also important to acknowledge potential non-point sources of bacteria that could be from wildlife or unmanaged animals such as feral hogs. So as fecal bacteria are common inhabitants of the intestines of all warm-blooded animals, it's important to note that they are also naturally attracted to riparian corridors, and with direct access to the stream channel, animal waste can be a concentrated source of bacteria loading to a water body. Also, animals do leave feces on the land, where they may also be washed into nearby water bodies by rainfall runoff. But actually, coli contributions from the mentioned sources could not be determined based on existing information. However, due to the urbanized nature of the watershed, it's assumed that the contribution from wildlife and feral hogs is minimal. There are also approximately 34 OSSFs that are located along the southeast watershed boundary. The TMDL watershed is also located within a region where the estimated failure rate is about 19%. So any leakage is considered to be a non-point source in origin. Then on this next slide, I do have the map of where those approximate OSSF locations are. Essentially, we counted any OSSF or address point outside of the CCN boundary to be equipped with an OSSF, since they are not on the main sewer system service area. And then next, we did cover like the regulated and point sources. So as of April 2025, there are no wastewater treatment facilities with a Texas Pollutant Elimination System, or TEPTIS, permit discharging into the TMDL addendum watershed. There were also no active general permits with no active wastewater general permit authorizations. The estimated total area of regulated stormwater is about 37.61 acres, which is about 1.18% of the watershed. Additionally, there were no sanitary sewer overflow incidents that were reported between 2005 and 2025. On this next slide, I will cover how we developed our flow duration curve, or FDC, but first I kind of wanted to touch on how we developed our stream flow record first. So the TMDL watershed actually does not have a USGS gauge, so daily stream flow data were estimated at SWCM Station 21433 by extrapolating the stream flow records from the USGS gauge for Long King Creek. It is also worth noting that we did use the same gauge as the original TMDLs and the addendum, so following the same methodologies and processes. And then, as we can see, our Hurricane Creek watershed up there is pretty small, and then we have our surrogate watershed down below for Long King Creek. And to account for the difference in scale, we applied a drainage area ratio. So here is our actual FDC itself, as these flow duration curves serve as the foundation for development of load duration curves on which the actual TMDL can be based. So essentially we rank the daily stream flow from highest stream flow to lowest, and then calculate the percentage time each flow is equaled or exceeded. So the period of record used for developing FDC should generally be long-term so that the curve can be regarded as a probability curve and used to infer the percentage of time that a specific stream flow is exceeded. Meanwhile, the hydrologic period should also be corresponding to the E. coli data availability. So this FDC actually reflects a period of record of September 2013 to October of 2024. And this is to capture variations in climate, so wet years, dry years, and pretty much whatever's in between. And then on this slide, we have our actual LDC itself, which was developed by multiplying the stream flow with the numeric water quality target and then a conversion factor to get it into billion CFU per day. And here in the red line, that is actually our LDC. And then we have our hashed black line, which is the LDC for the single grab criterion, which is 399 CFU per 100 milliliters. So everything above the solid and hash line is what needs to be remediated, whereas everything below is below the criterion. The LDC method does allow for an estimation of existing loads and the TMDL, or allowable load. In addition to estimating stream loads, this method allows for the determination of the hydrological conditions under which impairments typically occur, which gives us broad indications of like the origins of the actual bacteria, where it's coming from, so either point source, stormwater, but also it's worth noting that we did divide the LDC into 5 different flow zones. So moving left to right, we have high, moist, mid, dry, and then our low flows. And bacteria samples were also classified as either wet, which are represented in the blue triangles, and then non-wet weather events, which are in the black postmarks. With each of these wet weather events, those were classified as wet weather if there was a precipitation event within 2 or less days of when that bacteria sample was collected. And then in these green squares, we have the existing geomean for all those samples within that flow category. So historical E. coli data for the TMDL watershed indicates that bacterial load exceedances above the geometric mean criterion occurred during all flow conditions, and only 5 samples were below that geometric mean criterion, or red line right here, and they were all classified as non-wet weather events. So bacterial load exceedances during high and moist conditions were likely the result of stormwater runoff depositing bacteria into Hurricane Creek. Also, just as a reminder, there are no wastewater treatment facilities that are discharging in the watershed that could potentially contribute to the bacterial load exceedances during those mid, dry, and low flow conditions. So potential sources in those flow regimes could be unreported SSOs, leaky wastewater infrastructure, or just direct deposition of fecal matter into the TMDL watershed. So what is the allowable load, or TMDL? That is 52.85 billion CFU per day. And essentially, we just took the 5% or the median value between the 0 and 1% flow category. And if you just move straight up, that's where we actually get our TMDL calculation from. But the allowable load, again, is expressed on this LVC at 5%. And then here are our allocations with that equation one more time. So the allowable load, or TMDL, again, is 52.85, and that's the amount that can enter the water body while still maintaining that primary contact recreation use. So I'm gonna kind of break down some of these allocations and how we got there. So the MOS is just the TMDL multiplied by 5%, so we have 2.64. And then the WLA is 0, since there is an absence of wastewater treatment facilities in the watershed. And then the WLA for permitted stormwater dischargers, we calculate this by just taking the TMDL, deduct the MOS, and then the WLA for wastewater treatment facilities, which is 0, and then we subtract the future growth. And then lastly, we multiply it by a fractional proportion of the drainage area under jurisdiction of all stormwater permits, which was that 1.18% that I had mentioned earlier. And then just kind of going down the line, or the table as far as table 1, we have the LA, or the load allocation from unregulated sources. So we just take the TMDL minus the margin of safety, and then the WLA for both wastewater treatment facilities and permitted stormwater loads minus the future growth. And then for future growth, that's essentially how we account for population increases in the project watershed. So this is, since we don't have any wastewater treatment facilities, we have our estimated population and then have an amount tacked on in there in case we do have future wastewater treatment facilities that come online. And then in table 2, that's our final TMDL allocation. And here we can see that future growth is missing, but really it's just tacked on into that WLA for wastewater treatment facilities. Again, incorporating that future growth in case more come online to accommodate a growing population. And then here we have our daily load reductions needed to meet the E. coli standard by flow category. And here we can see that the flow regimes with the highest reductions needed are the high flows and the dry conditions. So high flows sit at about a 95% reduction needed, and then the dry condition sits at about 77%. And then just to cover some of our next steps, it is to submit the October 2026 WQMP update. The public comment notice will be emailed to all the stakeholders in the watershed and also posted on the TMDL program news webpage and posted on the WQMP update webpage. The AU in this addendum within the area covered by that implementation plan developed by stakeholders for the original TMDL. So there is an existing I-plan, and that I-plan does outline all of the adaptive management approaches in which measures are assessed annually by the stakeholders for efficiency and effectiveness. So please refer to the original TMDL document for additional information regarding implementation and reasonable assurance. Again, that TSD that we published online this month also has all of our methodologies behind how we got our TMDL allocations. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time. I've listed my contact information here, and I've also included the link to the TCEQ project webpage for anyone interested in additional information. And I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody want to take a break before the final presentation? No? All right, we're just going to roll on and get this one done in a record time. All right, so I'm going to have Kendra Fleming, who is our Public Relations Director, come up and tell you about our education outreach activities. As some of you know, Kimberly Wagner was our public relations person, and she got poached by the Forestry Association here. She's sitting in the back. We're still friends.
Still friends, we're like long distance cousins.
Kendra has picked up and run with the responsibilities, and she's doing a great job.
Yes, she is. How about that rendezvous?
We're gonna have updates on
She's
that.
going to tell you all about it.
I will. No, I wouldn't be here without Kimberly, so thank you, thank you. Our updates, we're still doing stash and trash bags. We are actually considering getting more of the bins like we have out front of our ANWR building and putting them in our partners' buildings like DETCOG, our Chambers of Commerce, so that we can have trash pickup everywhere. Meredith and I had the honor in late April of partnering with Angelina Beautiful Clean and DETCOG to clean up around Lufkin, and it was great. I think we filled, 52 bags of trash, something like that. So it was awesome. And Natchez River Rendezvous, we had 136 vessels launch. And in those 136 vessels, we had 184 paddlers and 112 volunteers. So it was a great success. Everybody that launched came back. We did not have to call 911. We did not have to use any of our medical personnel. So it was fantastic. And we are in the process of putting out new coloring and activity books. We have Compost Carl, who works at the Natchez Compost Facility. And then we have Andy the Alligator, who explores ANWR. Eventually, our thoughts for these are to have Andy and Carl go on adventures together, have Andy go on CRP runs, and put different books out that the kids can get excited about and collect and also learn in the process. So, and those you can download on our website, or you can come by our main office and pick some up. That's it. Short and sweet.
Yes. So the Nature Rendezvous was already in the planning stages, and we were very close to holding it whenever Kendra came on. So she's definitely been drinking from the fire hose on that one. Very excited to have her on board as well. And I think that is all the presentations that I have. As I said, the summary report is available on our website. Does anybody have any questions or anything else they want to talk about while we're here? Otherwise, call it a day. All right. Well, that's all we got for you. Again, I thank everybody for coming, and everybody that's online, thank you for attending. And we'll see you next time.